Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Champagne. I'm your host, and I want to welcome you to Change Ready, an original series brought to you by Behind the Human Malosi. It's a series in which we are doing everything possible to future-proof our minds and thrive in an era of unprecedented change. Today, we're speaking with David, a strategic partner and coach at BLUECASE with a PhD in high-performance psychology. He specializes in empowering leaders in fast-moving organizations to build great companies and achieve exceptional results. He is the perfect human to be on this series, given the work he's doing, the clients he's working with, and just all-around awesome human being. So welcome to this series, David.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate being here.
Okay, you and I spoke before, so we kind of have a little bit of a teaser of knowing that we've got lots of topics, I think that cross and overlap and so forth, and that we're going to jump into. But before we get into all of that, whether it's this series or the main show Behind the Human, I always ask the same question. That's to get past the job titles and all that stuff. And that's just, who are you as the human in front of us right now? If we erase all of that stuff, like, what feels most true to you right now?
Yeah, great question. Well, what feels most true to me right now is, I'm a father. I think of myself as a father first. I have a 2-year-old and an 8-year-old, and
so we have the same age range. I forgot that.
Yeah. And I learn a lot. I really learn a lot from them, and just find it so joyful and feel so alive around them. And then I also am the founder of BLUECASE Strategic Partners, and the premise of BLUECASE is really to create the best teams possible and to create the best companies possible. And I live in Austin, Texas. And yeah, happy to be here. So that's a little bit about me.
Sure. And what would you say, I suspect over the years, and as life and work evolves and so forth, and family, of course, and I totally resonate with that age group, of course. What are the fundamental characteristics that feel like they've followed you along your identity? Like, what are those core things? And are there any that in the last, I don't know, year or couple of years or so that you really feel shifted or evolved, just given the work that you're doing?
Well, when I was in college, I had the opportunity to go to India. So it was 1995, and to also go to Burma, and I was on a Buddhist studies program, and had the opportunity to learn from these extraordinary meditation teachers that introduced me to mindfulness, and that also helped introduce a lot of kind of what we relate to as mindfulness in the West here, and spend time with people who were doing solitary meditation retreats for like over a decade. And I think
which was not popular in this side of the world. Like, now we're talking a little bit about this, but just for context, right?
Yeah. And it was very different. And there weren't even a lot of people in Myanmar at that time, a lot of Westerners going in. And so when I experienced that really changed something for me, just realizing how unmindful I am. And also just sort of seeing the power of sort of mindfulness and presence, and what that can bring, that we're always, there's something that's available to us all the time. And a lot of times we can be distracted and not actually see what's in front of us and not be at our best. And so that has been one of the foundations for me, is presence, I'll just call it.
Yeah.
And that's definitely followed me along this journey. And it's in the little moments. I like this expression, I think, that they talk about in the Daily Stoic. I'm forgetting his name, but he talks about
Ryan Holiday.
But he talks about like how important the garbage moments are really important in when you're raising children. Like, so I have to walk. There's a parking lot I walk to, and for me, I'm just walking down a hall. But for my daughter, who's 2, it's this extraordinary, like, it's a hallway. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It could be Disneyland. And so she's taught me to, like, even in these moments that are transition moments, how important they are. And I think the same is true in companies and with leaders, that there's a lot of moments where, you're just you might just be assigning a task, or you're saying hello to somebody in the morning. And I think these moments are actually really important. You and I were having this conversation. We were talking about two leaders that we work with, and just how we feel differently around them. Because even in these small moments, the way they show up is different. And so that's something I think that's really important to me.
I want to kind of pull on the thread around these transition moments, or even just, I feel like what's the right word I'm trying to search for? It's like it's the subtleties in the perspective, because I think about, like what you said with your daughter walking down the hall. Like for us, it's just a regular thing. For her, it's could be this big magical situation. I had something similar too with my 2-year-old son, where like a dog just came up to him and was super friendly, but someone said, and he was totally fine, but someone said, well, imagine from his perspective, like the dog is, in this case, almost 2 times the size of, like, it would be as if this giant monster was coming in front of us as humans.
Right.
And I remember thinking, like, the whole interaction went okay, but like, that's got to be a bit terrifying. And if coming back to your example in the workforce, I'm thinking of, if a leader or a team lead or something says, hey, would you mind starting this project or whatever it is? And for them, it may be this normal occurrence, right? But for someone on the other side, it might be this monumental task. And just for us to just take a moment to think about, okay, and which links really well with what the topic of this series around change and the speed of change, but for us to just pause and think about those little nuances, right? Because they make a huge difference, from asking someone to work on whatever, I'm just making things up, but a project that could feel almost unsurmountable in terms of like size, right? And then if that, taking a little bit more time and being a little bit more into the details, or whatever needs to be done to help, deal with whether that's technology or whatever the case is. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I mean, let me know if that resonates at all with you and the work that you do.
Yeah, it does. So, I'm also the co-author of this book, Be a Better Team by Friday. And one of the things that you and I share, and things I love about your work the most, is I find your work so practical. Like, it's really practical, where you talk about kind of micro edits and just, small changes. And I love that concept of sort of like, I think of it as incrementalism. Like, what's the smallest change you can make that would impact the system?
Yeah.
And I feel like your work really does that so beautifully. My work has the same kind of principle in terms of like, how do you learn something and like immediately apply it to be a better leader and to be a better team?
Yeah.
Like, it's great to go off to Harvard and get an MBA, but a lot of the teams that I work with, they're busy and they have huge challenges and they don't have time to do that. So a lot of the tools and principles that I'm introducing, it's something that someone can understand within a few minutes, they can apply, and the next conversation, it makes them better. And one of the things like that you said that it makes me think of as well is, one of the little things that we're doing all the time is we're listening. And we're speaking. And I think that a lot of times people are showing up at work and they don't have the right receiver. So they're going in and they're not getting the signal because no one's actually shown them how to actually hear the signal. Like my phone is a few years old and it's not like receiving the signal from my Wi-Fi router very well. And so when I'm on calls, I can't hear that well. And people show up at work and it's sort of the same thing, where they're not hearing the music at work because no one's actually shown them how to hear the music. And I think when you just give them a little tool to actually hear the music, it can create a magical world. It can create flow. It can create where they see new things. They see new possibilities. But they're not, but no one's shown them that antenna. And, basically, and kind of an example of that, just to make it practical, is people are oftentimes just listening to what someone's communicating. And they're not listening to actually what is unsaid. What I want people to be listening to at work is what's everything that is not being said, and become masterful at hearing what's not said when your boss is speaking to you, when you're talking to a subordinate. And also, can you hear the commitment underneath everyone's speaking? So if you just could listen for the commitment all the time, and you can listen for the unsaid and tune into that, you will begin to hear music. And it really creates something very different in the workplace. Now, I just introduced that concept. Someone can apply this right away, and it will change what they receive. It will change their ability to lead. Does that land?
So, oh yeah. I mean, for me, kind of hearing or feeling what's not being said, or the messages that aren't being verbalized on my side, it's usually the anchor where we're all come in and say, well, this is where the benefit lies, when we can try to declutter and clear out mental debt so that we can actually hear that stuff. And then now you have this beautiful competitive advantage over those who are, statistically speaking, very fogged, and there's a lot going on in the mind, right? My natural question, as you were getting to know me a little bit more, like, what for you when you're speaking with teams and working with organizations, what are some of those tools to hear what's not being unsaid? And I guess my second question to that is, how do you see all of this relating to the world? I want to say that we're in right now in terms of hyper growth and change, but even more so kind of to the theme of the series over the next few years, where that's just accelerating at a pace that I don't even think we're cognitively understanding how fast this is coming. And we'll come back there. I have a question on that after, but how do you see all this stuff, helping future-proof our minds for this fast-paced environment?
Yeah. Well, I love what you said is first kind of eliminating some of that mental debt and some of the practices that you bring too, so that people actually have the ability to do this, because it actually requires effort. And a big piece of it is actually just noticing that you have a filter, and you're usually listening through a particular filter, and the filter that you're listening for is automatic. You don't even, I'm wearing glasses right now, and a lot of times I forget I'm even wearing glasses, right? It's just seeing the world out through that. And we have a automatic way of listening. And the automatic way of listening is, do I agree or disagree? Do I like this or dislike this?
Yeah.
And when that filter is present, and that filter is usually present all the time, you're discounting everything that you don't like, everything you disagree with. You're agreeing with everything you like, and you're not learning very much. So if you can recognize that you have that filter, and then just consciously choose, hey, I'm going to change my filter. Instead of saying, do I agree or disagree? Change it to, hey, for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to listen for what's being unsaid in this meeting.
I like that.
Or I'm going to listen for what is the commitment underneath whoever is speaking. I want to see if I can just hear commitment. Even if someone's complaining about something, can I hear a commitment underneath a complaint? If someone is going up and leading a meeting, can I listen for his or her commitment?
Yeah.
That's just a conscious choice. Again, these are examples of different filters you can listen through, and just change first, being aware that you have an automatic filter, and it's usually not very powerful. This agree, disagree.
Mm-hmm. It's totally surface level.
Yeah.
I love that.
And then changing that filter is just it's an example of a micro edit to start listening to something, and that will give you totally new information around innovation, around execution, around actually what people really think of your strategy.
Yeah.
All right, because it's happening all the time, right? You'll see this where like a CEO will be talking, and you'll just look at the body language, and you'll be like, wow, there's people don't agree with this strategy.
Yeah. It's such a cool. I love the idea of, like, my mind goes to, like, individually, let's run an experiment. Let's just pick a week, let's say, and run. But to your point, acknowledge the filters that we might be putting on these conversations or these meetings, which typically are, I agree or disagree. Listen to those signs of commitment, like, just truly, listen to what's not being said. I love that prompt, and just do it for your meetings all week. And then what I'd be interested to suggest or hear about how this goes is, by the time you get to the end of the week, kind of do a bit of an audit. Take a look at your calendar and do a little bit of journaling on, like, what did I really learn this week, or what did I pick up that was not just outright said and so forth. And I'm willing to put money. I mean, you're introducing this concept kind of live, at least for me, but willing to put money on it that you're almost blown away, and it's like a PhD Friday by the time you get to the end of the week in terms of the reflections or insights and the observations that surface.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I would put money in that too. And also just being aware of how frequently and how automatic this filter is. Literally every time someone's speaking, if you aren't consciously choosing how you listen, you have this filter like my glasses that it's on.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this person, I agree with this person. That person's so smart.
Yeah.
And then so that creates a problem, because then you have all this, anytime that you don't like something, you don't agree with it, all of a sudden you're literally not even hearing it. You're just throwing it right into the garbage can. And so you're missing so much information, right? And so being even aware that there's this filter is huge. And then being able to shift it is so powerful. It's so powerful for what you can accomplish, how engaged people get, what you can learn, all those pieces. And also then saying it, hey, my sense is you may not disagree with me. I notice you're kind of looking down, or you kind of smirked a little when I talked about this, right? And people say, well, actually, I don't. Can I, do you mind if I share? And it's like, then you're having this great conversation, right?
Yeah. Well, and I love it's true to its form when it comes to mental fitness, because then you're just by doing that in a very specific use case, you're just training your mind to pick up more and more detail, and that starts to ripple. That will for sure ripple across other areas in your work and probably your personal life as well. Like to your point, you start catching all the other filters we might be putting on, in different use cases and so forth, and waiting. Just give yourself that like micro pause of, wait a second, let me just step back for a second and then zoom up and see what's really happening here.
Yeah.
Right?
How do you kind of introduce those micro pauses when you're working with teams so that the mental debt isn't so burdensome?
Yeah. I thank you for asking. I mean, I was just with one last week, and I'm heading out tomorrow, so that it's all pretty fresh, because the standard flows that I'll bring into teams is usually around breathing, even for 30 seconds or a minute, just so people can feel what that's all about, and then all of a sudden we start our session together, and typically start their meetings or their flows from a place where people have released whatever they're coming in with, just by focusing on some guided breath work. Nothing wild, nothing too out there. There's maybe a few holds in it. And I'd say at this point, half of the teams usually raise their hand saying, yeah, I've done something like this. May not be consistent, but they've been exposed to it. And then the other half is like, no, but I'll try. And it's just, David, like the energy of the room within a minute shifts completely. There's this whole other level of, kind of a check-in, whereas I'll get people to check in just so they're picking up on how their mind feels. And usually people will, I'm overwhelmed, they feel stressed, they feel anxious, scattered, overworked, and so forth. When people are checking in honestly, which I do push them on. And then we go through that sequence, and it's complete, I feel relaxed, I feel curious, ready. So it's like, look, I mean, this took not even 5 minutes. Not even. So imagine you did this again before going in to present for your brand budget or whatever it is. And now you're going into that whole experience. You've already done the work. Like, the numbers and the slides and what you're presenting, but now you're going in present. And to your point, you're picking up what the person on the other side is maybe not saying, and gives you a better chance to actually, weave in there with, an appropriate response or a question or whatever it is. Where someone else may come in fully mentally cluttered and just stressed and nervous and anxious or whatever it is, and just like, okay, I've got to get this out this point and make sure I hit this slide. But there's all this missing data. That's there. To your point, we see it. We choose to remove the filter. So anyway, that's one. I mean, I'm always trying to do a mix of, let's talk about what's coming up in like conversations like this, but let's feel it in other settings so that there's an emotional response there. Like, you know what I'm talking about now. It's not just me saying, hey, breathe for a couple minutes. We just did it. and you felt it and I felt it, right? So same thing with gratitude, same thing with some, visualizations and so forth. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's great. And it is palpable. I notice that as a room gets more relaxed, like in the beginning, if I'm coming in presenting or something, that I can tell people are holding their breath when they
yeah,
come in, like they're just subtly, they're
yeah,
breathing really, and sort of as they get more relaxed, you can just notice like, oh, people are actually now breathing regularly. Like you can feel it's
totally.
palpable in the room, right?
Yeah.
I love that you're,
And me too.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's kind of selfish in a way, in the sense that I'm calming my own nerves. I feel more connected to the group as well. We're all kind of in. So what I love about it is because there's. I feel like there's a longing for community right now,
Mm,
and there's just a lot, as you know, with our remote work, and we were interrupted in our regular work cycles for many years. So now you come together, and this even happens virtually, but of course in person even more so. But we all feel connected in another way, like we're breathing in
mm,
unison in some sort of capacity. We all just
mhm.
went through some sort
Yeah,
of experience together,
yeah,
right? And I feel like I'm able to pick up more, having gone through that as well.
yeah,
So.
yeah. No, I think I love that. And you were talking about some of the stressors right now and kind of going to sort of your earlier question too. I think that we're living in a really unusual time right now.
Yeah.
In 1985, there was this guy named Warren Bennis, who was this professor, and he coined this term called VUCA, and to
Yes.
describe the time we're living in.
VUCK, right?
CA, yeah.
CA,
Yeah,
sorry, CA. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I looked this up last time.
Yeah, and VUCA stands for the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Yeah.
And also the Army War College started noticing, they started using this term too, because when the Soviet Union fell um, in around the 90s, they started using this term because, okay, now the Cold War is over. We don't just have like one threat. How do we
Hmm.
start seeing and responding to the world differently? And I think that right now we're living very much in a VUCA world, in companies and in our world, where there's all these new challenges, and the challenges are complex. Like you mentioned, a hybrid work environment. There's financial uncertainty. There's a lot of global events going on. There's we have all these new cultures working together and trying to understand
Yeah.
the needs of Gen Z and the different needs. And so, how do you kind of operate in this new world? And part of the way we need to operate is really being our best individually and as teams, right? And not kind of hoping for this return
Yeah.
to some kind of normalcy. Actually, learning how do you kind of surf the edge of chaos? How do you surf these waves, right? There is going to be some chaos. And can you learn to surf it instead of hoping there aren't going to be waves, right? And hoping there isn't going to be uncertainty.
I'm just writing this down. How do you search the edge of chaos? I like that because it's interesting in the sense, like, it doesn't have to be from the perspective of like that's a terrible situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can be. I think we can look at it from a perspective of like, let's not bury our heads in the sand and be real with the actual environment we're in, and just treat it as data without judgment. This is what's happening. There's a bunch that we don't know is about to happen, but how can we kind of enjoy that ride or that
Mm-hmm.
thrill of
Mm-hmm.
surfing on the edge, right?
Yeah.
You work with a lot of teams. Like, you don't have to name any clients or point anyone out, but if you think of the best in the world that you work in, and the ones that have really stood out, and think about how they're thinking about the next 3 to 5 years with all of the change that we're discussing. Like, what are they doing? What are they proactively, and what are you working together with them to proactively get themselves individually as leaders, but then also, our teams ready to surf the edge of chaos? I love that. That's probably going to be the podcast title.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, one thing is to start leading differently, right? Because I think now in this new world, so in the past, the idea was you just sort of simplify things down and reduce the complexity, right? But you
Mm.
can't do that. You can't reduce the complexity of like how disruptive AI, for example, will be on our workforce.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is just a simple problem. I've done this 100 times. No, you haven't. right?
Yeah.
So first recognizing that there are these challenges that, Ronald Heifetz from Harvard, he calls them adaptive challenges. And,
Yeah.
and those challenges are challenges where we don't know what the answer is. And we might not even know what the question is, what the right question to ask is, right?
Yeah.
And so,
That's
and a lot of
tough.
times people are trying to solve these adaptive challenges with technical solutions, right? Like with solutions that are known. So for example, like hybrid work environment, right? So how do you manage and lead in a hybrid work environment? How do you mentor someone? I was just talking to this manager. He said, I'm a really good manager. I really know how to manage and lead people. I don't know how to mentor people and manage people in a hybrid work environment. I'm not good at it. I'm really at my edge. Like I'm so skilled and it's totally dependent on being in person. I don't know how to do this anymore. My team, this company was totally virtual. They're distributed.
Okay.
He had to learn something really new. How do you build community? How do you build connection? How do you mentor someone? How do you build trust really quickly? His team is all over the country, right? So one is starting to not treat all problems the same way. And you need to, when you don't know what the answer to a problem is, first you got to actually, instead of just saying something like, okay, we're having this challenge, so everyone, 100% of people have to come back to the office. For example, that would be like a simple solution. Well, that might actually not be the best solution. Yeah. Maybe actually you need to learn how to adapt. So, okay, how do we create culture? How do we lead and manage? And asking that question and having the group, come forward and start thinking about how do we adapt in this new environment where no one knows the answer. Let's create some possibilities together. Let's talk about what's working, what we could do differently, for example. So that's one of the pieces of really focusing on adaptive leadership. Because that's what really a surfer can do. A surfer, he or she is adapting to the wave. They're constantly adapting. The Navy SEALs do this too, right? Like when they train, they train for every possible scenario. But then, like what the Navy SEALs are known for is they call it pickup basketball. They could just go to any court, like any court, like a street court where you don't know the rules, you don't know the players, and they just can pick up a basketball and win. Right? Because they're trained to operate in a VUCA world. They're expecting to happen, right? Like when they were going after Osama bin Laden, their helicopter crashed, right? And the door that they were going to go into was totally blocked. They couldn't go in that door. And they were completely prepared for, and were able to adapt to like, okay, we can't go in this door. And that was our whole strategy. They knew how to adapt. And that's what you need leaders to be able to do, to be able to adapt in that when there's complexity and when there's ambiguity and uncertainty.
I love it. I think of your wave example continues to come up in my mind as well, because I've interviewed actually some pretty big wave surfers.
Oh, cool.
And what always comes up, and this is coming up now in the way that you're speaking about it as well, even with the military, is like there's an element of you have to adapt, of course, and be present enough, coming full circle to how you kind of checked in, and having really good presence to what's happening in this case with the wave, and like kind of seeing what's about to happen. Any good big wave surfer kind of gets a bit of a read of, I've seen a wave like this before. I can put myself, a few steps ahead and be in the right spot or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, the wave still will you can't, if you're on a 50-foot wave or whatever it is, even something smaller, Mother Nature will win if you try to resist it. Which I see a lot of parallel to everything that we're talking about in terms of change and uncertainty and all of that. And there's a lot of resistance out there, and we'll never win that battle. Right. It's same even with the military. It's like, well, if you resist the fact that the helicopter crash in the original plan is kind of shot, well, we're done. Like we can't, we have to be, I guess a whole bunch of things have to happen, but you definitely need to be emotionally regulated enough to, and trained enough to, okay, let's just take a micro pause here and shift the plan. Like you don't even see that pause, but it just happens. Right. So how do we train our minds then, David, to be like, knowing that we're in this environment, knowing that there's more of it, either as individuals, team members, leaders, and so forth? Are there any practical tools that you think help in training for or boosting our ability to adapt?
Well, um, I think part of where this actually needs to start, I'm going to get to your question, but it really needs to start from the CEO and his or her leadership team. And they need to start to sort of create the conditions for this, right? Just as like the leaders of the SEALs are creating the right conditions for this.
Yeah.
Right? And because that, they're helping create the context for what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of times, leaders are kind of complaining sometimes about what's happening in their companies. Like they're complaining about like a hybrid, like, hey, people aren't engaged. They come to the office. They don't even want to come to the office, and it's frustrating, right? So how do they actually get out of complaining and start actually leading and creating a vision of what's possible?
Yeah.
I think that one of the main tools, and I'm using the CEO and the leadership team kind of as an example, is mindset. And just like we listen automatically, we also have an automatic mindset. And people don't recognize they can literally choose their mindset. And that's what leaders do. And so you can choose a mindset, for example, like in your surfing example, where the mindset of that surfer you were interviewing is, they were they're sort of expecting the unexpected.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
They're not expecting it to like, oh, I know how this is going to go, right?
Yeah.
And it's probably such a intimidating force. You know who's in charge, right? Like, the wave is in charge. There's no sense, right? So they're expecting that and coming in, and that's giving them an advantage versus if they were coming in and had a different mindset of, wow, I'm really frustrated. The wave just did this right now. I really didn't want that to happen, right? So choosing our mindset and coming out of a disempowered mindset, and most of the time people are in a disempowered mindset where they're sort of complaining about something.
Mm-hmm.
They're feeling frustrated about something, and they're trying to sort of control and minimize and avoid something because they have these concerns. And that's not a very powerful way of operating. You need to actually start focusing on, well, what is it you want? And that question, as soon as you are asked that question of what do you want, now you've just articulated now a vision of what's possible. And when you create that vision of what's possible, now you can start taking baby steps to get there instead of trying to avoid what you don't want. So that's something that CEOs can do and leaders can do. And I'll just use because I'm hearing this all the time right now. Like this example of people, a lot of CEOs are complaining right now about hybrid, about people not wanting to come into the office. And, I have this idea that I've been thinking about recently about like, well, what if you created a comeback culture where people were begging you to come to the office? Hey, I want to spend more time in the office, because the culture you had created was challenging and it was nourishing. And it felt good to be there. Instead of sort of saying, right now, the arguments, a lot of these CEOs are so disempowered. They're talking about like, oh, Gen Z, they don't have this work ethic, and they're entitled. And I'm like, actually, listen to what they're saying. I want to be developed. I want to have a job that has purpose. I want to feel connected. I don't feel that sense. So what if the leaders actually heard that and then created a culture that was like that? And you had this comeback culture where people wanting to come to work. Well, I've just created a vision. Okay. Now, what would be baby steps to start doing that? Well, how do you create that culture, a culture where people want to do that? So that's an example of a mindset shift, right? Instead of resisting that people don't want to come to the office, creating a vision of what's possible and a mindset around that.
I love that because I hear that as well. The other thing I hear a lot is something around, and this is from all team members, but something in the vein around, we've been through a lot over the last 2-3 years, and like people are stuck in that era. Whether in some cases these are companies that actually did really well through the pandemic because of whatever services they offered and so forth, but then they're still stuck in 2-3 years ago, and it's like, well, we need to move forward, whether we're trying to leave something behind that was good or something that was really challenging. Like we have to move forward. And what I like about your comeback kind of culture is doesn't matter what the situation is. It's like from now on, like let's make this the future. To your point, let's choose our mindset on how we want to show up and operate, starting now. Just start now, and make it enticing and exciting.
Yeah. How do you work with that situation when you feel, because I agree that there is a lot of people that are stuck. They're stuck on, the path,
Yeah.
the way it is. So what do you do when you're working with teams to help them get unstuck there?
I have two examples just to set some context, so that, because I find with any of this work, it's easy, especially mental fitness, it's easy for people, and I was in this boat too, to judge it as, well, this is kind of like woo woo, or this is, not grounded in, a bunch of science. I mean, which it is. It's just many don't know the science that supports it. So I always come in with story of some sort, and there are two examples. One I've used quite a bit, and one I'm actually, because someone's coming on this series. He was the first, Frederick, his name. He was the first chief evangelist officer at Google, and his book is called "What's Next Is Now." It's all about the future and future mindset and so forth. And he provides this example of Google X that, and I think they still do this, that in November, I forget what the date is, but there's a date of the Day of the Dead. And that day, Google Xers all come together, and there's a coffin of some sort, and they take all of their, ideas that didn't work, like Post-its, notebooks, all of that stuff, and they throw it in this coffin and then light it on fire, and release, all of that, what I would call mental clutter and mental debt. And then I wrote about this one in my book, but there's also Phil Jackson, the quite famous Chicago Bulls coach. This was in the era, and this is from the documentary on Netflix called The Last Dance.
I love
There's
that.
a scene in that movie, right, where Phil Jackson calls a meet or a practice, and for context for everyone. This is the last season that those players like Michael Jordan, Dennis Rodman, Scottie Pippen, some of the best in the world, were all playing together, and they were all moving on. Their contracts were expiring. There's various reasons. And he called a practice, and he said, "We're not going to play, but I want you to bring to the practice on a piece of paper what this team means to you. The good, the bad, everything in between, but just write it down." And he had a little tin cup, and he got everyone to put that piece of paper in the tin cup, and again, lit it on fire. And in both of those examples, and in that one specifically, Steve Kerr, one of the players that participated, he said something to the effect of, like, out of all the practices I've ever been, that was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had. And it's just, Phil gave the players an opportunity to have some closure. And so I provide those examples, and then we sit down and I just take a piece of paper out, and you don't have to share the thing, that's personal to you. But if you think of the last couple years, like, what's something you would just love to let go of? That thing in the back of your mind that's just kind of eating away at you. Maybe it's not super present all the time, but it's that thing in the back corner. It's like, you want to clean up the room in your house, but you just keep putting it off. Like, what is that thing? Write it down, write down the emotions that are linked to it and all of that. And then we close our eyes, and because typically I'm not lighting things on fire with teams. That scares them. Although, in the right setting, we probably could, and it would be great. But we just rip the pages up, and then we usually do a couple of rounds of breath to visually see that release. And it's not to say, like, the way I preface it, it's like, this is not the end all be all, but it's a step to move forward. And clearly, like, if you look at, Google X and whatnot, there's value to it, right? And you can make up some, create some more mental real estate for the stuff that you want.
Yeah.
And I feel like with the change, like, that could be a really good flow as well as an organization, and also a way for everyone to come together and say, hey, we're in this together. Let's design or co-create the environment and the culture that we want moving forward, knowing that these are some of the facts that we at least know today.
Yeah. I love that. Because I think there's both kind of, sometimes there's something individually between two people where you can have, mental clutter.
Sure.
And so sometimes there's something like, so we'll do clearing practices, like where there's conflict between two people. They can actually just get clear with each other, even if it's whether it's small, big, and we'll actually have people do it with all the team members just to get clear. Like, hey, this.
That's powerful.
Hey, you said you're going to do this. You didn't do it. I just got to say I was disappointed at this is how it impacted me. Hey, and then they can apologize, take responsibility for it, and then all of a sudden you can leave it in the past because it's still
you lighten,
right? And same thing, we do it with teams too, where we actually just have people have an open conversation about all the challenges. We call it 10,000 feet, all things that are going well and all the challenges in the company. And to actually say what everyone's thinking, but no one is willing to say in front of the CEO.
Like,
you know,
which any team can resonate with.
any resonate. And we actually have them say it, you know, in the room collectively. And then, you know, make sure the CEO and the leadership team don't resist it, and they can just sort of hear it and say, got it. Even if they disagree with it, you know, just let it be out there. And also that's kind of one of the practices we use to help clear this, because once it's said or written down, as you said, it actually now you've just given us a space for actually it to clear for a new future.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, and everyone listening to, like, you know, we're talking about definitely some big things and potentially some big movements within teams and so forth, but equally as important as an individual. I mean, you can do this on the micro and just get to the end of the day and open up a journal or notebook. And, you know, some of the prompts that would come to mind is like, what is something that I want to let go of from today, or clear out, and just write out some of that emotion, and always try to finish on gratitude and leave your body in an emotional, like a good positive emotional state. So you finish off like, what's something that I could celebrate, or an unexpected celebration. That's another one. If you get tired of, because it's easy to, with gratitude questions, I find, you know, where people have the most challenges, like, my family, my health, people say the same thing over and over again. But when you get into the detail of like, what was unexpected today that, you know, I really want to celebrate, or the small little wins and the micro wins and so forth. And there's a lot of them. To your point, when you start paint, like, again, like coming back to what we were talking about earlier, you start training your mind and removing those filters. This stuff just starts coming up. Your self-awareness, you just see it's a whole other world of operating.
Yeah. I think it's so important too, because like the reality is these challenges are difficult. I don't want to minimize these. Like, you know, there's tremendous mediocrity in companies right now. And I think it's frustrating for CEOs because they want to go faster. And the data shows this, right? Like, where you have about, you know, 70% of the intelligence, the creativity, the innovation, the engagement is offline in a company. So companies are paying for it, and it's literally like it's like a resource that's like sitting in the ground, like it's not being used. And so they're operating in like, and that's 70. That's like that's an F, right? And the companies are actually still getting good results. Like, they're still growing, but they're doing that with like almost no capacity, like 30%, you know, they're operating at 30%. You know, and these challenges, like, how do you create a great culture when you have results you have to hit, and how do you address all these challenges? Like, these are real, and they're difficult. And what oftentimes is missing is kind of the work I think you're doing, and the work that I'm doing is people don't actually know how to be great. Like, they don't actually know, like, what, like, companies have values. Most companies have values and a purpose. But employees and leaders actually aren't trained like this. Do this, and this will make you great. This will make you a great leader. This will make you way better. And some of these little tiny, you know, these micro edits, these little, you know, practices that you have and we have actually show people how to be great and how to get that, you know, that 70% back online. I think that's, and then you can perform at a totally different level, right? Because then you have the best out of everybody instead of operating from this place that you're really handicapped, you know?
Totally. Well, and I think because I think the other element, it's doing great, but then also tapping back into what it feels like to do great work and be a part of a great team. Because I think and I say this from a place of judgment or from a place of non-judgment, I should say.
Say it's from a place of judgment.
Yeah, I'm highly judgmental of this, but no, from a place of non-judgment, because we've just society in general and the way we've operated and productivity and this and that, like we've just normalized, I think, operating from a place of, to your point, of 30% as like, this is just what it is.
Yeah.
Right. Or an opening question I usually have with teams, and it's meant to be a bit cheeky, but I think it's grounded in a place of realism, is who wants to wake up feeling great more days than not? And I think we all do, but for the most part, it's the reverse. We don't. And just acknowledging the fact that I think it's possible. And do we not deserve that? Like, not to say that every day is going to be like that. I'm not delusional. Like there are bad days, but I think we could give ourselves, a higher percentage on, hey, I feel great, I feel motivated, and then also know that, something's going to happen today to probably throw my mind off or whatever it is. I have the tools. I have a kit that I can rely on to come back and flip and really, like, whatever you need that thing to be, right? David, if you go back to the late 90s and let's say you went back to that same location in India where you studied and so forth, what would you bring back today from that culture and their practices to kind of implement or talk about in our current, like on the subject that we're speaking about right now, around like rapid change and so forth, and readying our mind for that environment?
It's a good question. Part of my, so my PhD is studying why do certain teams and individuals perform at exceptional levels, even in suboptimal circumstances, they're able to hit it out of the park. And what are those practices and tools, right, that they're able to do? And part of that is really studying and looking at exceptional people. So these are people who are kind of really exceptional in that space of presence and mindfulness, and they also kind of what is oftentimes called like don't know.
Okay.
So not knowing and is actually
being honest with that
is actually a strength, because like we actually know very little. Like if I said, hey, what are you willing to bet your life on? Like if you're wrong, like there's very little that I'd be willing to, that for certain.
Yeah, that's true.
And so actually being able to embrace like you don't know, and how do you move forward without knowing? How do you move forward by sensing, committing, and creating something, and being comfortable not knowing all, and being comfortable, again, surfing. There's a lot of not knowing in surfing, right? I would imagine, right? You don't know what's going to happen. There's a lot of not knowing when you're leading. And I think that my experience of a lot of these meditators, what they were actually really comfortable with is not knowing and recognizing like life is very uncertain. I mean, we could die at any moment, for example. And we all know stories of this, right? So how can you embrace that and then lead and through being present and being authentic and being your best as an individual. And then also, and the other thing I think that stood out is there was incredible kindness. That one of the things that actually, when you actually see clearly, I think that kind of it's a natural reaction is to be kind. And
it makes sense though, right?
Yeah,
because we're not so tangled up in our minds that, like, you're in this stress state. So you're essentially in a survival state, and you're making decisions and operating from that place that even if you're trying not to be, I don't know, edgy or whatever it is, I mean, it's just, you're in that state. It's like now you're operating against like some pretty like prehistoric programming that's from our evolution, like hard to be at your best if you're super scared and stressed and in a fearful state, right? So that makes sense to me. It's practically makes sense. And we've all felt that. It's right. If you think of those moments, of those situations where you're doing something, whether you're I don't know, you're at a concert or you're exercising, like everyone's different. You have those moments, or you put on a song that puts your mind in this beautiful state. Those conversations afterwards are completely different, including the ones to yourself.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think, something else I was just thinking that triggered, the other thing that struck me about these people is they don't have phantoms. So usually when you talk to someone, you can see they have all these phantoms, like they're like around, like there's so much, there's noise and clutter. And there wasn't that noise and clutter. You could just sort of sense it palpably just from watching them talk and move. And I think that part of, this is actually, how do you not have that clutter? And also, and some of that clutter, I think, is you want to look good, you want to know the answer, and you want to be right. They didn't have those. They didn't have those.
Ego.
Like, I would say that. And so then if you lead and you don't need to know the answer, you don't need to look good, and you don't need to be right, a whole world opens up for you. And they were comfortable leading from there. And I would say a lot of them were actually really interesting leaders.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. David, this has been exciting is the word that I would use. And not a word, which is interesting. It's kind of full circle, because the reason behind this series is, of course, just, we come from a similar place in the sense that we know there are a lot of tools and things available for us to be able to equip our minds for this time. But if I think of the word exciting, what wouldn't be the first word I would have described to jump into this series, in the sense that there is a lot of heaviness to the world that, we're in and we're about to live in and so forth, even though we want to lighten it as much as possible. But I feel like this conversation and the way that you flowed through it, tools you provided, the perspectives, the models, and all of that, I'm just feeling excited about, hey, like, imagine what we could do equipping the world with and teams with this mindset, and what's possible in these circumstances. Like, there's so much opportunity around the board. If we just set the right perspective. Exciting.
Yeah. And I think it's important too, even like, there's a lot of heaviness, right? Like, yes. Yeah. And there's also a lot of extraordinary things. Like, every day there's so much extraordinary things that are happening all the time. There's so many actions. And so I even think that's important. Like, one of the things that has been really inspiring me recently, kind of on this, kind of just to end, maybe as we're wrapping up, is Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, is talking about, like, he's really excited about AI, because the faster AI can be developed, the more human goodness is going to be in the world.
Interesting.
And the more empathy there's going to be in the world. And he's creating like an empathetic AI, an emotionally intelligent AI. And he made this comment that if we are not able to imagine, I was listening to him on this podcast, if we're not able to imagine what's possible and what we want, then we're certainly not going to create it. And so we live in an extraordinary world, and there's a tremendous amount of beauty and a tremendous amount of possibility. And I think there also is darkness and a lot of, grief and sadness too. But I think also, like, making sure that we're creating this possibility, and we're focused on and imagining, like, what is the best possible outcome here? And then creating that together. And because that's actually, this world we're in is very exciting, and we're too at the same time. And there's also a lot of very positive things where we're moving very quickly towards levels of abundance we haven't seen before, ever.
I agree. And I think that's a beautiful question that you left with us for leaders and teams and organizations to sit down at the next town hall or all company, whatever you call it, but just to take a pause from regular business operations, let's say, and, like, what is the best possible outcome? Like, what does that look and feel like if we had no rules? And, often we make up a lot of different rules that aren't even, really a reality of a situation. But if we had no, like, what would that canvas look like? Let's just start from the blank canvas. How do we want to show up here as an organization? How do we want, how do we want to respond when we're hit with challenging situations, or as things are shifting? Because to your point, we don't know, but we can decide now, when things are a little bit more calm, let's just say, how we show up in those situations, and, like, set like that be the tone of the culture. I mean, I'd sign up for that company. Let me know where the job posting is.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
I think
amazing.
I think it's important we all create that together, you know?
Yeah, I agree. David, we obviously can go for a lot longer, and we might have to get a part 2 in at one point. But for now, we've reached our time, and I want to thank you again for making time to come on the show and be a part of this series. And a higher thank you to you and the team for the work that you do and put into this world. It's the ripple effect of what you're doing day in and day out. Has an exponential impact, as you know. So, but I think we need reminders of that every now and then because we get stuck in the autopilot every now and then as well. So, thank you for that. And lastly, if people want to learn more about you and your work, where can we find you?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you can go to BLUECASE.com. That would be a good way. I'm also on LinkedIn. David B. Greenspan on LinkedIn, and that would be a great way. So love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Last question for you and we'll wrap. What's making you smile these days?
What's making me smile? I think we're sort of talking about this a little bit, just the curiosity. And I find my 3-year-old, her just curiosity is just making me smile. The other day, this is a little younger, but I was walking into a building and there were flowers in front of the building and she hadn't really seen a lot of flowers and they were kind of like at her height. And she stopped and was like,
yeah.
Did you just see what I'm seeing?
Yeah.
This is like, it might as well have been like the most spectacular fireworks. She was like, our mind was just blown. And I had walked by these tulips, but for her, they're right at her height level. And she's like,
that's like in the forest.
Just like,
right?
Look at this, and I was like, it's a flower. She's like, oh my God, that's a flower.
Yeah.
And so, that beginner's mind is just so, I get moved talking about it. So I think that, she just makes me smile and, on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's what a beautiful way to end because I think I learned this studying Stephen Hawking when I wrote about him in Personal Socrates, and because it brought in the whole, obviously the realm of the universe, and we're just a small little kind of blip in this bigger, universe and world around us and stuff like that. And whenever things are feeling heavy or stressful, we can always take a bit of a trip. And like for us as parents, and there are many parents listening as well. Like think of your kids, think of those moments, like you're saying the tulip, or I'm saying when my child runs up against a small dog that probably feels like a giant horse of some sort, just to shift perspective, right? And lighten the situation and then come back, to whatever's going on. This was a real treat. I'm really grateful that we were connected by some beautiful mutual friends and humans of the show and business and so forth. And I feel like our paths are just beginning to cross. So I look forward to the next adventure.
Yeah, same, Mark. I feel really energized talking. I sort of felt that the last time as well. It's really fun I feel like just to create with you and to imagine new possibilities and to learn together. So it's been a lot of fun for me to talk to you and listen to you as well.